how good are these? I thought I'd buy a whole bunch of these. I'm a little bit late to the party, but you know, looks good on my shelf. So we're gonna be talking about the FX30 versus the A7IV and who's going to win overall. So yeah, this is gonna be a fun one. Anyway, we're going to be discussing the FX30 again, and you know, because a lot of my users actually utilize full frame and the A7IV or A7III, but a lot of my users also use the A6000 and you know, the APS-C range, which is pretty interesting because the new FX30 is an APS-C camera and it's a cinema line, and you know, the A7IV is a really high-end photographer, videography camera. It's great. And there are probably some people out there thinking, should I switch to the FX30? It's APS-C and I can use my full frame glass on the APS-C. It's difficult because we're gonna be talking about the pros and cons of having full frame, APS-C, the FX30, A7IV, all these kind of things, because it really depends on obviously what you do. So yeah, let's get into this video. Hey, what's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. And if you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. And I do a whole bunch of videos on the A7IV, A6000 series, all Sony stuff, all audio stuff, lighting, anything videography based, some photography as well. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the FX30 and should you be investing in this camera? Should you be buying this and selling your A7IV, selling your A7S III, FX3, whatever camera you've got? Is this a camera to get in 2022/2023? What do you think? Comment below, let me know your thoughts. So I only got the camera for a couple of days, literally, like I was trying to push its limits, stay up all morning, all night, trying to do as much as I can. Did a couple of shoots with it and it performed incredible. Like in the right hands, any camera will be incredible. Like I did a video showing the differences between the A6000 and A7IV when it came to photography, and a lot of people are like, wow, some of the A6000 shots actually look better than the A7IV, but you could tell the difference obviously with resolution because the depth of field is different as well because it's full frame versus APS-C. But as per usual, it really depends on what you're going to be utilizing this for. Okay, so now this is the big one right now, and that comes to price. Obviously, the FX30 is I think it's like an $1,800 US camera. That is crazy, crazy cheap price, especially with the specs in this that we're going to be going over. But FX30 obviously kicks the check mark off with this one. Now the FX30 is designed for video first. Sure, it does take photos, but it takes photos in one frame. So it's a single shot only. It's a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor versus the A7IV is a 33 megapixel full frame sensor, but you can do 10 frames per second. So that's a big key factor. If you are a photographer, the FX30 is definitely not for you. The A7IV is probably the one to pick up. The A7R5, eventually, if that comes out, that would be one to get. The A1 obviously is the one to get when it comes to photography, but the FX30 is not. It is a video camera first, so it's optimized for video. So you do obviously have to take that into consideration. If you are a hybrid shooter, the A7IV is probably your best bet here because takes incredible stills, and that downsampled 7K sensor to the 4K, it's incredibly crisp. I did a comparison with the FX30 and the A7IV side by side, utilizing that 4K at 25 frames per second, and they were pretty much indistinguishable. They were pretty much the same. Sure, the depth of field was the only thing that gave it away when it come to the A7IV because you have less depth of field, it's much blurrier background. That's the difference between APS-C and full frame when you're accounting for that crop factor and trying to compose the talent or the subject in the same composition. Now, when it comes to low light performance, this is where I did see a difference. The A7IV does perform better in low light situations. That could be due to that higher 7K sensor that downsamples to 4K, the noise reduction in camera as well, which you cannot turn off. But it performs almost just as good as the FX6, sometimes a little bit better, which is very, very interesting. Now, rolling shutter is an interesting one because the FX30 has better rolling shutter performance than the A7IV. So if you are doing sports videography or photography, The FX30 has a slightly faster sensor readout, so you would probably go for the FX30 if rolling shutter is an issue. Now, I know a lot of people tend to do a lot of vlogging when it comes to the A6400. We all know when that dropped, there was a whole bunch of rolling shutter. That the performance wasn't great, and the FX30 could be a pretty decent vlogging camera because it's an APS-C camera, it's cheap, and it can do the job. Now, if you're after slow motion when it comes to 4K, that's going to be the biggest differentiating factor right here, because A7IV only does 4K in 10-bit with S and Q mode at 1080p, whereas obviously the FX30 is in the Cine line. It does 4K 120 frames per second in HS, which is your H.265, or it can do S and Q mode as well, but 4K, 120 frames per second, 10-bit codec as well. So the FX30 would be your choice for that if you want to do slow motion in that camera, but it also does 1080p at 240 frames per second, whereas the A7IV maxes out at 120 frames per second in 1080p. Now, overheating is an interesting one because the A7IV, I actually haven't got it to overheat at all. You turn that internal temp sensor too high and you have zero overheating issues. Whereas the FX30 has an internal fan, so you shouldn't get any overheating issues at all as well. But you also have to turn that internal temp to high as well. Just like the FX3 and just like the A7S III, you do have to turn that on or you could potentially get overheating issues. But you do have that fan, so you're going to be really good in long, interview sort of setups. Now, it does have two slots for the SD card and Type A cards, whereas the A7IV only has one Type A card slot. Now, I use Type A cards pretty much all the time because you're able to utilize that all-I codec and also all the S and Q modes, so you can pretty much use every single function. So it is a pro that the FX30 has two slots there. Cheaper lenses. Now, this is a big one because obviously APS-C lenses are much cheaper than full frame lenses, especially when you see, the 11mm, the 15mm f1.4, the 10 to 20 power zoom lens. These lenses are so much cheaper than the full frame counterpart. If you're trying to get the 20mm f1.8, the 24G Master, the 35G Master, they are some pretty expensive lenses. They're typically 2 to 3 times more expensive than the APS-C counterpart. So, if you are trying to invest in the APS-C system, it's going to be so much cheaper. So when it comes to full frame and APS-C and glass, it does seem like there are better quality glass in the full frame range. That is a big plus for the A7IV because it is within the full frame range and you can utilize so much of the good glass, but they're both Sony E-mounts, so you can actually use that full frame glass on the APS-C camera as well. So, I'm gonna have to give the check also to the FX30. Now, the key advantage of the FX30, it does have timecode in as well. So in a professional sense, if you did have a timecode reader, you can plug it directly into the FX30 and sync cameras. So that's really good for multicam usage and really good for usage on set as well. If you want to try and keep the audio in sync with the camera, that can be a big issue with some of these cameras, is that you're trying to utilize it in a professional situation and it doesn't have those professional features there. Timecode could be a make or break, especially if someone wants to hire you for BTS and sync the BTS with the actual footage. That could be a really big deal breaker if you only have the A7IV. So now we've got to talk about the EVF. Now, the A7IV does have an EVF, and it's a $3.68 million EVF, whereas the FX30 doesn't. So if you are in really high key situations, bright situations outside, you can utilize that EVF. Whereas the FX30, you would have to have an external monitor, which generally most of the times if you are filming, you will have an external monitor. But if you're trying to keep a really compact form factor, the A7IV is going to win here. Now, both of the cameras have variable shutter, clear image zoom, focus mapping, focus breathing compensation. It also has the gyro data, IBIS, active steady shot, full-size HDMI, the multi-interface shoe as well. They are pretty well high-featured when it comes to all these new features in the Sony Alpha cameras. So they both get a check mark for that. Now, one of the biggest features that did come with the A7 IV is the mode switch. You can switch it from photo to video to S and Q mode. Now, this can be really advantageous for people who are switching in between each mode, especially if you are a hybrid shooter and need to go from photo to video, or you need to go straight into that slow and quick mode so you can get some 1080p 100 frames per second footage, whereas the FX30 doesn't have that real fast menu. It does have a mode button though, which you can switch into that, but that switch could actually be a little bit more beneficial to hybrid shooters. Now, the A7 IV does have APS-C mode. Sure, the FX30 already is an APS-C camera. It's got clear image zoom, but the A7 IV, you can actually choose that Super 35 mode in video, which gives you obviously high resolution 4K image with a cropped in field of view, and you can use clear image zoom on top as well. So that is advantageous for the A7 IV because you do have 3 different focal lengths that you can actually utilize with this camera. Now, a small point, but also still a point, is that the FX30 has that same menu as the FX3. So it's got that little second drop-down menu that you can actually have. You can swipe up on the screen as well to get that function menu. And you can also use SONY EI, which I'm going to put this all in the same point with this one. Now, a big one when it comes to video shooters is the front and rear tally lights. Now, tally lights are really important because you actually understand that you are recording. The great thing about the A7 IV is that you do have that red box around the screen so you can still see it's recording, but you don't have the red light on front and you don't have the red light on the rear. Now, this could be obviously really important if you are doing interview setups and you cannot physically see the screen, but you can still see those red tally lights. So that is a really good plus for professional video shooters. Now I'm going to put these 2 features in the same one. You can do loading LUTs because that doesn't really give you too much benefits. I mean, you can obviously load a whole bunch of your own customizable LUTs into the camera, which is kind of cool, but doesn't really affect the performance. It may affect the way that you expose the image, but you can do that with an external monitor as well. Now you can also have that XLR top handle with the FX30, which could be really advantageous. You do have 2 XLR inputs on that, and obviously that handle screws in as well, because you can get the, what is it? I'm not sure what it's called, the KLX XLR input, KLM XLR input for the A7 IV, but you can't screw it into the hot shoe. So it does put a little bit of pressure on the hot shoe, but obviously the FX30 has the screw-in parts where you can screw it into the body, and it's going to give you much more stability, professional audio into the camera. Now the FX30 does have, this is probably one of the biggest features, it is 16-bit linear RAW, external to the Atomos Ninja 5, which is great. I think the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, I think you can get 4K 60 internal record, external RAW as well, which is pretty good. I'm not sure if you can get 4K 120 RAW, but obviously RAW recording is really good because you can change your white balance, you can change your exposure externally, but you know, it's not as beneficial to some, but it is there in case you do need that 16-bit linear RAW. So what is the takeaway from today? We can pretty much see that the FX30 is incredible when it comes to video specs, and you know, on paper it does translate to the real world. I did test it out in a few different situations, and the FX30, it performs incredible. I absolutely love it when it comes to video. But when it comes to stills, obviously the A7 IV, you just can't beat it because it actually has all photo, you know, features that the FX30 just doesn't have. The FX30 is just lucky that it can actually do a 26 megapixel single shot still. So if you are like a hybrid shooter, I'd still recommend the A7 IV because it is absolutely phenomenal in low light situations and photos, whereas the FX30 is pretty much 100% for videos. But you do have to toss up what are the pros and cons, and if it's going to suit you in each individual situation. If you're going to be doing low light stuff, A7 IV might be your best bet. If you're going to be doing rolling shutter and fast sports action, wildlife, FX30 is probably going to be your choice. So try and really have a look at these pros and cons and see if it's going to suit your situation. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up. That'd be absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.